And welcome to Inside Albania with me, Alice Taylor. This week, I wrote an article about Kosovo and the situation going there at the moment with rules to enforce euro as the sole currency throughout the whole country. And my article was picked up by Denis MacShane. And we started speaking via Twitter, and I thought, why not invite you to Inside Albania to talk about Kosovo and Albania? Now, Denis MacShane was the member of British Parliament for Rotherham since 1994 for the Labour Party. Then, between 2001 and 2005, he was the Balkans Minister. Later, between 2002 and 2005, he was the Minister for Europe in the government of Tony Blair. So it's fair to say he has quite a lot of knowledge on the region. He was also the United Kingdom's delegate to the Council of Europe. He's written for many leading British newspapers. He's been on television all around Europe talking about the region. And he's also written a number of books, including one on Kosovo. So today, I welcome Denis MacShane to the studio via Skype. Good afternoon, Denis. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Albania.
Great pleasure to be virtually in Albania, at least.
So I want to dive right in. Now, we connected via Twitter on the topic of Kosovo, and I did some digging, and I read about your book, Why Kosovo Still Matters. And when I was I didn't have time to read the whole book in the couple of days since when we spoke. That's my disclaimer. But from what I could understand, you were making a call for policymakers in the West to re-engage with the Western Balkans before it's too late. Now, I read this and I thought, well, this is what I'm asking for as well. But then I saw that the book was written around 12 years ago. And I thought, hold on. So something that you wrote 12 years ago is just as poignant now as it was then. And I thought, well, that's not great. That's not a great sign, is it? So my first question to you is, you made these calls in the book 12 years ago. Have they listened? Where are we now?
We're not any further forward. Imagine if in West Europe about 1958, France and Germany weren't recognizing each other. There wasn't the beginnings, laying the foundations of the European community. Countries were hostile. Countries wouldn't talk to each other. There are endless accusations, which could well be justified in the 1950s about corruption in many governments. And so there was just no normal West Europe. I mean, that would have been a gift then to Stalin and the Soviet Union. And just as the West Balkans disarray, the failure of Europe to understand what needs to be done in the region is a great help to Mr. Putin. And it's just quite remarkable. The European Union is there to bring in the countries coming out of dictatorship, Greece and Spain and Portugal coming out of fascist dictatorship in the 1970s and then joining the European community in the 1980s. The countries of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, others, including Bulgaria and Romania, again coming out of a communist dictatorship and still very primitive, a lot of internal corruption, but at least joining the European Union. And here we are, though, we're still saying to Albania, we're saying to Kosovo, we're saying to North Macedonia, saying to Serbia, no, go and become perfect, become little Switzerlands overnight, and then maybe we'll start talking to you. And it really is a great failure, I think, of the European project.
Now, your book was called Why Kosovo Still Matters, and just for people who haven't read it, why does Kosovo still matter then and now? What's its significance?
It represented the worst moments of the 10 years of the Milosevic wars against all his neighbours, the ethnic cleansing, Srebrenicas, the tortures, the death squads, the corruption, buying Western politicians, including, I'm sad to say, some British politicians. And it finished sadly, but necessarily with the military intervention, because that was the only way you could get Mr. Milosevic and his Serb machine to stop. It was necessary in Sarajevo earlier. And Kosovo was freed from Serb domination and control. And I often think of it in terms of Ireland, a country that my mother's side, my family comes from, that it too broke away from England, from British control. It fought a savage little war against the British. It then fought a very ugly civil war. But finally, it was allowed to be free. And the British accepted that Ireland was not going to be ruled from London anymore. But you still have this permanent sense that Mr. Vučić and Serbia cannot accept the existence of Kosovo. And rather sadly, one or two other countries which really ought to know better say, oh, if we recognise Kosovo, Catalonia will be free. If we recognise Kosovo, our minorities in Hungary will suffer. A complete and utter nonsense. And there's this lack of historical perspective, I think, by too many people, too many leaders in the rest of Europe. Kosovo is far from perfect, but it exists. It's a nice country. It's got lovely mountains, lovely food, lovely people. It's poor, but it should be allowed to become rich by becoming just a small member of the European community of nations.
And I mean, it does have a lot of problems, but if you look at various recent reports on Kosovo, things like media freedom, democracy, corruption, the rule of law, things are getting better. Like, from where I'm standing, they seem to be making a concerted effort to move things forward. And the same cannot be said for other countries in the region. As you mentioned, I would say Serbia, which is backsliding, where its population don't want to join the EU. It's less than half, whereas Kosovo, it's nearly 100% want to join the EU. And talking about the crimes you mentioned before in Serbia, you know, the atrocities they committed, the people who committed them are celebrated as heroes. And sort of accepted by the government. And I find this really, really confusing. Kosovo's doing everything right, but it's being sanctioned, although the EU prefers to use the term measures, whereas you have Serbia, which is doing everything wrong and has the door open. Come and join us. Do you think this is it? They want to bring Serbia closer because they're worried what happens if they don't?
Well, the big difference, of course, is that Mr. Putin invaded Ukraine by air, sea and land with a huge army, and the Ukrainians have been battling bravely with help from the democracies of the world to stop that invasion and reverse it if possible. And what I've noticed throughout this long life watching just geopolitics, the United States in particular loves to kind of collect countries and say, you're on our side, you're in Team USA, you're in Team Biden now, or Team Trump perhaps in the future. And what Mr. Vučić's done is very clever. He sent a modest amount of weapons via Bulgaria to Kyiv, to Mr. Zelensky, and then Serbia then can get listed as a country that's in the broad alliance of against Putin. I'm sure he talked to Mr. Putin about this beforehand, and Putin said, oh, go ahead, do it, because we know you're really on our side, like Mr. Putin knows that Viktor Orban of Hungary is on his side. And Mr. Putin's main geopolitical ambition or objective is to weaken and break up the EU. He doesn't give a damn about NATO. I mean, NATO will be there. It could be there in 100 years' time. It's a military alliance. Yes, if there's fighting, NATO is relevant, but the decisions are taken in Berlin, in Paris, in London, in Rome, not really in Brussels. But what he doesn't want is Ukraine to become a bit like Spain in the 1980s, a nation of 40 million, quite corrupt, coming out of very, very bad political era, but bit by bit becoming more European, focusing on good business, unleashing investment, dealing with worst examples of corruption, letting its people, and succeeding very well. And then if that Ukraine becomes a European EU country on Russia's frontier, Russia doesn't really have a frontier with the EU, with obviously Ukrainian and Russian being similar to some extent, so they can understand each other. Most Ukrainians will speak some Russian. And that is a terrible example to the people of Russia from Mr. Putin's point of view. I think it's a wonderful example to the people of Russia from the point of view of the people of Russia. That is why he invaded Ukraine. That is why he supported Brexit. That is why he supported Marine Le Pen. Mr. Putin's key object always is to weaken and divide the European Union.
Now, you mentioned somebody there, and it's made me think about something. You mentioned Trump. Obviously, there is a chance we may see him as the president of the United States again, which personally I find quite terrifying. But his ambassador, his representative in the Western Balkans was Richard Grenell, who is not one of my favourite people. Him and I have had some interactions in the past. What impact...
Good for you.
They weren't very pleasant. Hi, Richard, if you're watching. What do you think about the possibility of Trump being president in the context of the Western Balkans? Is this going to be a disaster for Kosovo? Is it going to be a disaster for the EU accession process? What impact do you think it's going to have?
Not really a big impact, I hope. I suspect if Donald Trump was doing an interview later today on American television and was asked to name 2 countries in the Western Balkans, he'd have to ask for a timeout to get somebody to tell him the name of any of them. He doesn't know the region. He doesn't specialize this region. It's handed over to quite dynamic American diplomats. Richard Holbrooke at the time at the Dayton conference completely ignored the need to solve the Kosovo problem. He left it festering there, and it blew up in the face of the West a few years later with the terrible violence. I mean, violence of any sort, having to send troops, is a geopolitical disaster. And Mr. Grenell also seems to, he's like a character. I don't know if you watched the Netflix series The Diplomat, big mouth American diplomats. He seems to want to play that role. But unfortunately, the vacuum's created because Mr. Macron, Mr. Schultz now, and before them, their predecessors, have taken so little interest. Britain isn't a player on European foreign policy anymore. Issues like Kosovo, because we don't attend any of the meetings where the decisions are taken. And truth be told, at times, Kosovo politicians can rather irritate and get up the nose because they're very stubborn. They always think their
mentioning no names
is right. Well, good friends of mine. They all denounce each other, and everybody else is a rogue, and only I have the shining truth. I believe that possibly may exist somewhere in Albanian politics as well, Alice. And everybody should obey me, and then all will be well. Okay, that's actually normal politics. You shouldn't have to worry about it. But Kosovo has never really lobbied effectively in European capitals. It's focused so much of its lobbying attention on the United States, which is understandable. America was a big help 15 years ago. But I just constantly said to visits to Pristina, with all the different parties and prime ministers, look, guys, your future will be settled in Paris, in Berlin, in Rome, Madrid, London. Get out and start persuading the deciders and the policymakers in those nations that you have got a good case. But, we could add in, to come to Albania, obviously the great fear for the last 10 years, particularly since the interventions in Libya and Syria, which destroyed the Libyan and Syrian state systems, created failed states. President Sarkozy and David Cameron, with America just looking on, completely destroyed the states in those countries. No law and order, no police, no education, no good running water, no health. So all of the people there want to get out to Europe. Earlier, it was Iraq and Afghanistan. The West, unfortunately, by using kinetic military energy, and it's not particularly a left-wing or a right-wing thing, all leaders have been responsible, have just turned the countries and the territories around on the edge of the European frontier, especially its southern Mediterranean frontier, its eastern Mediterranean frontier, its Turkish frontier, into great passoires where millions of refugees, asylum seekers just want to come to Europe to get a better life. And you get the counter reaction from people in the different European countries who say, God, we can't take in all these people. Big problem for Rama and Albania, I'd say.
And we'll come to that a bit later, because that's a whole topic.
To some extent, but my constant argument has been, that may be true. In that case, make those countries work a bit better. Now, we can't reverse the mistakes of Nicolas Sarkozy and David Cameron in Libya and Syria, or the mistakes of Tony Blair and others in Iraq, but we have got a stake and interest, because in the end, the countries of the West Balkans, they are part of Europe. They're as European as Lithuania is, or Sweden is, or Ireland is, and they deserve a bit more focused attention to come in and be able to grow. As I said, I cite the cases of Cyprus, Greece, Portugal, Spain in the 1980s, Cyprus a bit later, Poland and other incredibly poor countries with pretty rotten politics, who now may have difficult politics, but they're recognizably growing stronger all the time. Whereas the West Balkans have just been left on the back burner.
Yeah, it should be a case of join us and we will help you be better, not be better by yourselves. Okay, we'll give you a bit of money and like a sort of rough to-do list, and then maybe you can come and join us. It should be the other way around. Now, I wanted to ask you as well, before we move on to Albania, talking about Kosovo, we've discussed previously that the EU's stance towards Kosovo is a bit soft, is a bit harsh compared to how it deals with Serbia. And I wanted to ask you, the Tory government, the Conservative government in the UK recently, especially David Cameron, the new foreign minister, and Alicia Kearns as well, they have been tough on Serbia. They, in the absence of the US really doing the same, and I'm sorry, but complete nonsense coming out of the EU. The statements I hear from representatives there, it's like you said earlier, I don't think they even know where it is on a map. That's the feeling I get. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but Alicia Kearns, David Cameron have been quite brutal towards Serbia, rightly so, in my view. What's driving that? Is this a political thing within the Conservative Party, or is it, for once they've sort of understood the reality of the situation?
I think Alicia Kearns, who's the chairperson of our Foreign Affairs Select Committee in the House of Commons, possibly by accident. I wasn't aware of her as a big foreign policy specialist, but I must say, since she's taken over, I think she's been very, very impressive. And I just hope that her successor, because there's quite a good chance that the Conservatives will lose power this year also. And again, I keep saying to my friends in Kosovo, make friends with the people who are going in the British House of Commons to sit on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and will be the future possible ministers in the Foreign Office. Invite them down there, organise seminars, get to know them, allow them to know you. I haven't particularly noticed David Cameron. I mean, if he is getting tough on Serbia, that's a good thing.
He came to Kosovo. And then he went back and he spoke in Parliament, and he said he referred to Serbia sort of as a Russian proxy, and said that more needs to be done. And I was, it's one of the few things he said I like.
Well, good for him. Bravo, David. I mean, Boris Johnson, when he was Foreign Secretary, came up to me and said, Dennis, all that stuff you're doing in Kosovo, it's wonderful. Please come in and see me. Come and talk to me about it. I didn't really take up the invitation because he was too busy destroying the country with Brexit. But then destroying the Tory party by becoming the Prime Minister he became. But I think he had a genuine interest. There is, I think, a residual interest, and it's not party political at all in Britain, but it needs to be warmed up all the time, because Cameron, Boris Johnson, myself, we're political animals of the 1990s, when we were faced just with that decade of Milosevic massacre, mayhem, Srebrenica's and ethnic cleansings. I'm nervous always of the word genocide, but and again, there's no political divide on that. But the point is, it's no use David Cameron or Labour's incoming Foreign Secretary coming down to Kosovo. Well, it's welcome, obviously, to Pristina, and issuing lots of warm words or even wagging a finger at Serbia, because we're not there in the European Council meetings. No. Our Prime Minister is not meeting President Macron, Mr. Schultz, Mr. Sanchez in Spain, Ms. Meloni in Italy on a regular basis, and gently nudging and pushing and creating a European Union force field of a better policy in the West Balkans. We're now isolated.
But I would argue that the British view, the words that come from the British government do carry a lot of weight here. And although maybe it wouldn't be privy to discussions about Kosovo joining the EU, etc., I do think these words are very important. They do carry weight.
I agree.
So
I agree, Alice.
Keep it up. You've been outspoken on the Albania bashing by the UK press. I was as well. It was quite a stressful time when it was all really going on. And Prime Minister Rama said it was a sign of failed UK politics. And I said it was an attempt to galvanise right-wing voters at a time the Tories were really suffering. I think they were at their worst ever in the polls. This is something that you would agree with, I imagine?
Yeah, sure, but it's true in other countries. I was attending last autumn a very high-level meeting in the city of London of Spanish businessmen, investors, experts, political scientists, and I just mentioned the idea that it would be helpful if Spain could recognize Kosovo, and they exploded in my face if I was asking them to recognize, a North Korean politician as a great person. And it is just emotional now in too many countries, and we almost have to have foreigners to beat up on. The whole of Brexit was driven by xenophobia, by dislike of the foreigner. I mean, not just the Brexit campaign, but way before. I mean, I've just published a book, my diaries from 1997, 2001, thoroughly recommended to all friends in Albania. But then the Conservative Party, faced with Tony Blair, how do we trip Tony Blair up? Oh, he's pro-European, let's be anti-European. And this depiction of Poles at the time, they're welcome as fighter pilots, they're welcome at Monte Cassino, they're welcome when they landed at Arnhem and on the beaches of Normandy, but now they're unwanted immigrants in Britain, and that anti-Polish feeling was really disgusting, again, largely organised by the Daily Mail newspaper. And once that died away, they looked for some other foreign group, and the Albanians were an easy target.
The Albanian ruling party, the Socialist Party, has close ties with the Labour Party, with Tony and Sherry Blair. Eddie Rama's been on Alistair Campbell's podcast. Are we going to see better Albania UK relations, you think, when the government, and I hope it will, when the government does change?
I hope so. Just a tiny word of warning. I am a big friend of Tony Blair, and you can read the book, the diaries I've just published. You'll see how much I admire him, and a very long-term friend of Alistair Campbell, his great press officer, who is a close friend of Eddie Rama, and I welcome that. But they are, a bit like me, yesterday's men. You've got to talk to the incoming, the younger, the next generation of politicians in Britain. And Labour at the moment, because, as I say, we're likely to form a government, we're looking a bit further ahead. You know, governments change democratically in Britain. Find out some Conservatives and make them friends of Albania and Kosovo now.
Yes.
Or indeed friends of North Macedonia with its significant Albanian-speaking population. Because in my own view, one of the mistakes in European enlargement is to say it has to be everybody or nobody, to bring in every country in one big bang. I would break it up and say North Macedonia, okay, it's got problems with Bulgaria on language, constitution, we know that. But it's peaceful, it's a great tourist place, it's largely agriculture. The relations between Albanians and Macedonians is pretty good compared to what
elsewhere.
we can see. Well, elsewhere. So 2 million people, we wouldn't notice it coming in. The EU. So just get North Macedonia in, maybe one or two other smaller countries that could quietly come in. And certainly I would look very seriously at Albania entering the EU.
I was going to ask you.
And not wait, as I say, for everybody, as you rightly said, to be perfectible or perfected before they can join.
What do you think? What do you think of Edi Rama? What do you think about the last, is it 10 years he's been Prime Minister now, 2.5 mandates? What's your view? You can speak freely here, so...
Look, I like Eddie. I worked with him when I was on the Council of Europe more than 10 years ago, and he was fighting the mammoth election fraud that was going on. And I went to see him, and he showed me figures which instantly I could recognize as somebody who's elected himself, and sat there looking at results coming in my own country, my own results, that something absolutely criminal had taken place. So I mobilized support for him, and he's a larger-than-life character. He features in a new book that won the European Book of the Year prize, awarded in Brussels last December. I sit on the committee that organises that, and it's a book by a Austrian writer called Robert Menas. I hope it's translated into Albanian soon. It's in French and German, and the character of Edi Rama is given another name, but he's the Prime Minister of Albania, educated in France, plays basketball, larger than life.
Could only be one person.
And it's dear old Eddie. And I think he speaks a lot of common sense, and he speaks in several languages. He's a larger-than-life, real old Balkan personality, but on the whole, with his instincts are in the right direction.
And I mean, aside from domestic politics, and I've said this to him, I've said, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm not always a fan of things you've done domestically, but I like what you do, how you present and how you represent Albania outside Albania. He's brought EU summits to Tirana, the Western Balkan Summit to Tirana. He's given very good speeches in Brussels, which has really rightly criticised the European Union, the European Commission. So I like this about him. Now, actually, this week it was announced he is bringing Zelensky to Tirana. There's going to be a Ukraine peace summit here. Do you think he's, and I asked him, I said, are you maybe looking for a job in international diplomacy sort of after you finish? And he was like, no, I'm tired. I'm not quite sure I believe him. Do you think all his attempts, everything he's doing internationally is to bolster Albania, or because maybe he has aspirations for something bigger later?
Well, it's up to him. All I'd say is that guys who are dynamic prime ministers, and Eddie certainly is, who then go and become international foreign policy bureaucrats, quickly start getting white hair and bent backs because international foreign policy, diplomacy, technocratic deal making is just so exhausting and difficult and hard and pretty often boring. So I think Eddie's much better as a larger than life character. He speaks excellent French, as we know. He painted Tirana in wonderful colours. He's got good, clear answers when I see him on television in Britain. It's great that he's bringing Zelensky. Also, some elements of Edi Rama. I mean, Zelensky was a comedian. He was a star of Ukrainian showbiz. And he knows how to make a dramatic impression when he's addressing the US Congress or the Houses of Parliament in Britain.
The two
and
together.
He's fighting a very important. He's fighting a very big fight against a very bad man, because the history of Europe of the last, nearly 30 years is of Russia rejecting the European path, insisting it can be a nationalist, authoritarian, autocratic country. It's the same status as the United States or China. It isn't. Other great countries after 1945, like France, Germany, not Hitler's Germany, Britain accepted. They weren't world powers, and they adjusted accordingly. Mr. Putin still thinks that Russia is a world power. It's not. It's dangerous, and it's doing such damage to the great people of Russia, who are incredibly one of the great nations of Europe and the great peoples of Europe, and they should also be part of the European community of nations, in my view.
I wanted to ask as well, going back to Albania again, because I wanted to cover a few recent sort of events. You're probably aware of the recent house arrest of Sali Berisha, the former president and prime minister. And there's this whole drama going on here at the moment, more than usual. I mean, it started when the opposition resigned their mandates from Parliament. They, walked out of Parliament, and then the opposition completely split in half. I'm not even sure who's in charge of it anymore. I don't know how many factions there are. I can't keep up, honestly. And now Sali Berisha has been put on house arrest, and he's sort of going out on his balcony and saying, I didn't do anything wrong. I interrupted him, and he said, I've never engaged in any corruption. And he's saying that this is all politically motivated, and Rama's saying, no, it's not. What's your view on this?
I'm not a judge. I don't speak Albanian. Look, I met Sali Berisha 20-odd years ago, and even then he was a legend in his own lifetime after the pyramid scandals of the 1990s. He's a bit like Eddie. He's a larger-than-life figure, same age as Donald Trump, the same megalomaniac ambitions, the same accusations of corruption. Donald Trump might well have to be in prison even before he stands for president because of his organising the insurrection to overthrow democracy in America on Capitol Hill 4 years ago. And so Sally I see as a kind of West Balkan Donald Trump. His English is excellent.
Except he's not allowed to go in the US.
Well, or the UK. I mean, he's banned from entering Britain or the States because of all the different corruption allegations. And he still plows on and on and on. I mean, I would welcome myself perhaps a calm, moderate European centre-right leader of the centre-right politics in Albania, which exists. It's important. Eddie Rama doesn't speak for all of Albania, far from it. But I guess as long as Sally is in good enough health to wreak havoc, I mean, you can't run democratic politics on the basis of walking out of parliaments. I mean, that's not Balkan politics. That's sort of, Caucasian politics. And
setting fire to Parliament, these things.
Yeah, I mean, all those exploding smoke bombs inside Parliament. I looked on that because that's one of the few images that sort of burst through on social media and on television here. And I thought, for God's sake, Sally, the damage you're doing to the image of Albania, you're confirming every Albania-phobe reactionary in Britain.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alice. All the best. Bye.
That's all for this week. You can watch Inside Albania every Saturday at 5 on Euronews Albania. You can catch up with previous episodes on our YouTube channel, and you can listen to the audio across all major podcasting platforms. Until next week, Miropavsio.